1854, Buena Vista College had reached a crossroads in the 60-year struggle for existence. Under the leadership of Henry Olson, president for 23 years, the college had finally shed the crippling debt that for long threatened the future. Enrollments were up, and 2 new buildings, the men's dorm and Edson Hall, had been recently constructed. Most importantly, the college had finally earned the crucial North Central accreditation. The future looked brighter than it had in decades. However, despite the upswing in Buena Vista's fortunes, it had become clear that in the modern age, survival alone was not enough to secure the future. The college needed to grow to remain healthy. This challenge greeted Jack and Ruth Ann Fisher as they came to Storm Lake to serve Buena Vista, and to take the college into a new era. The college had few resources and fewer prospects, but Jack Fisher, the young, energetic, cigar-smoking president, brought a new vitality and hope that was difficult to resist. At that time, the main buildings on campus were few. Smith Hall served the science department. Edson Hall, or Victory Hall as it had been called, was the gym, and the new men's dorm, later to be named Pearson White Halls, housed the surging male student population, many returning veterans from the Korean conflict. Fracker Hall, a converted army barracks from World War II, served as the library, a far cry from today's newly completed Library and Information Technology Center. But undeniably, the center of campus was Old Main, the 3-story stately Victorian structure that housed the administrative offices, most of the classrooms on campus, the chapel bookstore, theater, and music department. The 3-peaked roof and stone archway were the architectural beacons that drew everyone to its wooden-floored halls, commanding a panoramic view of Storm Lake. Built in 1893, Old Main was the original campus building. Although the years had brought with it the edges of decay, for many, Old Main still represented the rock-solid foundation of the Buena Vista dream. But on the evening of September 27, 1956, the new hope Jack Fisher had brought to campus suddenly began to spiral away as smoke poured from the roof of Old Main. Within moments, fire engulfed the newly replaced roof.
At first there was sheer and utter disbelief. No one wanted to believe it, first of all. And as I recall, when you looked out the window, you couldn't see that there was any action over there, but you could tell people were hurrying to the building.
I was at home with my family. My parents had been students at Buena Vista, and the sirens were blowing a lot. And then we could see smoke and fire, and not knowing where the fire was, we started out walking toward it, my mother, my sister, and I. My sister was in high school. And as we got closer and closer, we realized, of course, that it was Old Main. My mother was very devastated because she had very fond memories of having been a student here. And Old Main was the center of the entire campus.
Once the realization set in that the building was not going to be usable, it was then one of, well, what are we going to do? You know, I mean, we've got classes that are already scheduled and so forth, and then I think sort of a feeling of despair set in.
Fire trucks were called out from Alta, Newell, and Storm Lake, but no effort could quell the raging flames that consumed the roof and 3rd floor. Meanwhile, groups of students ventured into the lower floors to salvage what they could of college records, valuables, and furniture.
I remember that a lot of us streaked over to the building and started carrying things out. We carried things out as fast and furiously as we could, and the fire department sort of indicated that this was an old building going to burn very fast, and we better get out of there, we better stay out. No one really wanted to believe that. We wanted to try and save as much as we could, and we kept going in until they made us stop.
If we hadn't had the boys' dorm, I think we'd lost everything, because the boys all came up and helped carry things out. And if they'd been scattered around town, they couldn't have gotten there in time to do any good. And Jack had a brand new desk in his office that they had taken in, and they'd taken the top and screwed it on, then they put a glass top on. And that night they just carried the whole thing out at one time. It was just a little bit of paint along, that was all. But, and I had $60,000 worth of bonds in my living room for a while in a wastebasket.
We had just bought the house that we're in about 2 years before, and we were busy remodeling, so when I went to bed, I slept. And at that time, we still had the old fire whistle that would blow every time there was a fire, and we slept right through it. It was a nice evening, and the windows were all open. And not only that, the fire trucks from Newell came, and they went right up Lake Avenue. Our home is a half a block away, and never even heard that. So I heard it the next morning on the radio.
My husband said that on the wall there were 2 shells. Everything else collapsed and fell down into the hole. But the Christian flag was standing on one shelf. The honor scroll was on the other. And he said this is symbolic of where Buena Vista is going. He said it's got to be a meaning someplace in that. And I truly believe that.
One of the symbolic things that was very meaningful to an awful lot of people was this Christian flag that blew outside the window and was stuck to the brick by the fireman's spray, and it survived the very intense heat. I don't know how, but it did. And it was there, and it was there the next morning, and I think that was a great symbolism of for a Christian college. And I guess if you talk about heroes, it would be the Board of Trustees and again, Jack Fisher's ability to bring us all together.
I remember the next day probably more vividly because the student body gathered around the flagpole that stood in front of Old Main, and we prayed with President Fisher, and we sang the alma mater, and there was a real sense of family, and almost like a family losing a loved one.
For many, it seemed like the burning of Old Main was the last straw in a futile struggle, that perhaps, after so many sacrifices and tribulations, trying to go forward from this devastating loss was simply too much to ask. Ultimately, the Buena Vista dream seemed too vulnerable, too fragile. But that wasn't how Jack Fisher and the college administration saw things.
When President Fisher announced that classes would be held as usual the next day, that gave everybody there a considerable lift.
I think that the leadership under Jack Fisher had a lot to do with it. When he came to this campus, he was a young, dynamic man that announced at the very beginning of school that by the end of the 9 months, he would be able to speak to every student by the student's first name. So you know he was dedicated to BV. And he had this power and this desire to see that BV lived. And it could have been the turning point where we died. But he was full of energy, and I think that Ruth was right there at his side helping. So, in fact, I think the whole town rallied around.
One thing that I remember is a couple of weeks later was homecoming, and it was probably the best homecoming we've ever had. Everybody was, talk about school spirit, it certainly was there, and it was evident to everyone within the college community as well as the community of Storm Lake. It was probably one of the best parades we've ever had, and the winning float that year was a white dove rising out of ashes, and I can't remember exactly what it said on the side, but there were not very many dry eyes as they watched the students show to the community that the spirit that we felt that Buena Vista would indeed raise from the ashes. And of course we had no idea it would turn out to be what it is today, but we hoped.
Eventually, the college community rebuilt what had been lost, and because at the crucial moment, those closest to the Buena Vista dream did not turn away, Buena Vista College indeed rose from the ashes to become much more than anyone could possibly imagine. The stones from the cherished old main arch were recovered, along with the victory bell that hung atop the belfry. The arch was reconstructed as a gateway to the campus and as a reminder of the indomitable spirit that lives on in the new halls and classrooms that have replaced Old Main. Eventually, the stone arch, moved when 3rd Street was closed to make way for the spacious new Forum, was reset into a massive brick monument that sits in the center of campus, the gateway through which all students pass twice, once upon arrival as a freshman, and again at graduation. The ritual twin processionals serve as a living reminder that we always pass from one gateway to another, just as the passing of Old Main, as sad and tragic as it was simply the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another in the long journey toward something better, something much greater for the life of Buena Vista. In the 40 years since that blaze lit the autumn sky along the north shore of Storm Lake, the dream of education for service has burned only more brightly with each passing year, lighting the way for the hope and future for Buena Vista.
And I think that's true of Old Main. We had to lose it in order to gain more. And I guess that was it.